Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm a Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapter 9 of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. And I am having a real hard time with these intros recently because now that we're doing news at the end, I never really know what to say here. The weather's shitty. It's Memorial Day weekend, and I was hoping it would be nice out. I had a get together with some friends the other night, and my family is having a get together today. I can't be there. I have work, unfortunately, but I was really hoping that it would be a nice weekend. And tomorrow is actually Memorial Day, and it's not going to be nice out tomorrow either. It doesn't seem like, at least not where I live. So I hope that for some of you guys, it's a lot nicer out, and you're able to get together with some friends and family and enjoy the long weekend. Oh, here's something I can talk about. We're 75% of the way through genealogy. More now that I've beaten chapter 9 by the end of today will be 10 out of 12, so whatever that is, 5 out of 6. That's pretty good. We're closing in on the end here, and I have to make some decisions about how I'm going to handle the future. I'm thinking about having like some sort of final thoughts section. I don't know if I'm going to make that its own episode after Endgame or if I'm just going to stick it onto the end of the Endgame episode, make that a super long episode. I'm not really sure. I think it might maybe be better to do that as its own episode because then maybe I can do some other stuff in there as well. Maybe do some like favorite songs, favorite characters, favorite stuff like that. I'm not really sure. I haven't decided yet. And then in however long it is, couple weeks, couple months, whatever it ends up being, we're going to start Thracia, and that's going to be interesting for a few reasons, but I think mostly it's going to be interesting to see now that I am out of genealogy and the chapters are going to be a lot shorter. How is that going to impact my ability to get these episodes out? Is it going to be feasible to do more than one chapter per episode, or am I going to have to do like 600 episodes or whatever because there's so many chapters in this series, and I don't want to not give the attention to these chapters as I do them, but I also don't want to have like 3 hour long episodes every time. So we'll see. The beginning of Thracia might be a little rough because it's gonna be some trying to find my footing here, figuring out how much I want to talk about per episode, but we'll see. We'll get through it. So I think that's enough of a preamble. Without further ado, let's get right into our chapter for the episode. Chapter 9, For Whose Sake? Forgot the name there for a second. The chapter starts off with the opening text crawl. The narrator starts getting up on his soapbox a little bit, or her soapbox. I don't know the gender of the narrator, whatever. Talking about Thracia a little bit, the narrator says that it's the only state that's sort of seen as an ally of the Granvale Empire. Pretty much all the other nations they had to conquer. Thracia, I guess, kind of just like went over to their side willingly. So they're sort of seen as an ally as opposed to a conquered territory, basically. It spent some time talking about the obstacles that Seliph is going to have to face going into Thracia. Primarily, I want to focus here on Hannibal. This is where we get Hannibal's name drop for the first time. He's regarded as, he's called Thracia's Shield and is regarded as one of their top generals. And Seliph is going to have to fight him. Thracia sort of sees him as an invader because, I mean, that's what he is. He's doing it in a kind of self-defense. I think it's fair to assume that Travant would not just kind of let him go on his merry way. So it's pretty understandable why Seliph would be invading, but at the same time, they are a conquering force moving into their territory. So I think that the populace is maybe a little worried about what Seliph's can actually do. And the narrator starts soliloquizing. I don't know if that's the right word, nor do I know if I'm pronouncing it right. But basically, he just starts going on about there's no justice in this conflict. For whose sake, that's where the name of the chapter comes from, but for whose sake is this being fought for? And just saying that this entire thing is pointless. That's the whole point of this chapter, really, oddly enough, is that this conflict's kind of pointless and no one really wants to be fighting, but different factors are pushing them into conflict on both sides. And it's saying that it's shaken the resolve of Seliph and his army, which we'll see more about in just a minute. We cut to Travant mad, very mad at what Altena did, because she kind of just let. She has Gaebolg, so if she had joined into the fight, I don't know if she would have won, but she definitely wouldn't have, like, those Draco Knights that were fighting wouldn't have gone out like such little pussy bitch ass babies. So Travant's mad that she kind of sat the fight out, and Altena tries to push back a little bit. She says, I don't. We couldn't do that. We couldn't just kill civilians like that. I disagree with these tactics. The Thracians are a proud people, and I don't think that they would approve of these methods, of these sort of underhanded methods of conquest and of battle, which kind of made me raise my eyebrow and say, well, this isn't new, right? Travant ambushed Quan in the desert and killed him in cold blood in a very underhanded, very good, but very underhanded strategic decision that I'm sure wasn't a secret. Like, the Thracian people probably knew about it, or at least some of the nobles did. So, and they've developed that reputation as like hyenas, and they'll attack anyone no matter what. Their women and children are just easy targets to them. I don't. What has been going on before now that all of a sudden attacking fleeing civilians is like, oh well, that's too far. That's a step too far. And like, it's not. Altena specifically, I can understand. Maybe she hasn't really gotten a chance to be in battle yet. Maybe she's still kind of coming to grips with all this and isn't approving of it. But she specifically references that the Thracian people wouldn't be okay with it, which just seems odd to me because this is not a new sort of method of battle that Travant is employing here. We meet Arion. We met him last chapter, but he didn't really say that much. He comes in and sort of tells Altena to stop and to listen to Travant because he's their father and you can't really put up a fight against him. Travant mentions that Hannibal has been, who we just met a second ago, has been acting weird, having some funny ideas, I believe is his wording about this conflict, and says that he is going to go and handle him, and he flies off to deal with it. We cut to Hannibal, where we find out that he doesn't think that this war is worth fighting. Again, he kind of references it being pointless and that no one's happy about it. There's no reason to be fighting the liberators. Instead, they should make a truce or something like that. But Travant shows up and they talk about it, and he actually he doesn't try to hide it. He says, I don't think that this is a good idea. We shouldn't try to fight these guys. And Travant says basically, just do what you're told. And I'm actually going to take your son to keep you in line, kind of use your son as a hostage. And then once the fighting's over, you'll get him back. But if you betray me, I will kill him. And it's just another instance of how cold and heartless Travant is. Although actually, some of that is called into question this chapter, which is interesting. And I can't wait to get to that because it adds some texture. I wouldn't say depth, but texture is maybe the right word to Travant's character. And actually, the first thing that got my gears turning about him happened right here, where they're talking about Charlo. It could be Corporal, but it's Charlo, and how he's not Hannibal's real son, and Travant doesn't understand how he can have so much sway over him. And they have a conversation about how, family transcends blood, and just because he's not his real son doesn't mean I haven't cared for him all these years. And Travant kind of laughs him off and says that that's, ridiculous and that he's a bleeding heart. I don't remember exactly what he says, but I think he kind of just scoffs it off. And obviously there's a parallel here between Hannibal and Travant, where Hannibal has been raising Charlo all these years. He's not his real son, but he is a very, very important part of Hannibal's life. And then meanwhile, you have Travant, who ostensibly just took Altena and has been raising her as his daughter for all this time. to use as a glorified weapon. And there's some questions here about, does Travant feel this way about Altair? I mean, the obvious answer would be no. But then I guess the question would be like, well, what's the difference? Is Travant really just that heartless of a man, or is there something else going on here? So that caught my eye for sure. And then finally, we cut to Seliph and Lewin. They're talking about what's going on. Again, for the third time this chapter, Seliph brings up that the fighting is pointless. I'm not going to harp on about this because it's not that big of a deal. It's pretty brief each time they mention it, and I get that they're trying to drive home a point that this is just a tragic conflict that serves no one and is just being extended for no particular reason. But they do bring it up a lot, and they bring it up again here. Lewin gets kind of, I'm mad, maybe isn't the right word, but he kind of snaps at Lewin and says, or at Seliph, and says, if you can't, he says, this is war. If you can't handle it, run back home to Chernanog, which is where he was from in Isaac. And Oifi actually steps in and kind of tries to defend Seliph, but Seliph says, no, he's right. I have to, if I'm going to be a leader, I have to be able to see this through to the end, even if I don't think that it's right. There's a scene here that happens if Finn is alive at the beginning of this chapter, where he and Leaf talk about Altena, and Finn says, "Hey," I think even Seliph brings it up just before now. Altena was sitting in the mountains near Manster, and presumably she was pretty high off the ground, but I guess everyone could just see her perfectly and knows exactly what she looks like, what weapon she was using, and everything. But that's beyond nitpicking, so I'm not gonna. It's not that big of a deal. He says that Altena was, or he says, did you see that Wyvern rider sitting there? I think she was wielding Gaybolg, which means that she must be Altena, Quan's daughter. And he proceeds to lay out. He's like, I suspect that, and then proceeds to lay out Travant's entire plan and exactly how it went down in detail. So I thought that that was funny. He just says like, well, probably what happened is, and then beat for beat explains exactly what happened. So Leaf kind of says, I'm surprised that Travant would spare a little girl like that. And Finn says no, he probably just did it because he wants to use her for Gaybolg. And then Leaf kind of pulls a 180 and says, oh, well then yeah, he's just a piece of shit. And this is the second instance of this kind of thread of what is Altena to Travant? Why did he spare her? Has that reasoning changed at all, or does he still only see her as a weapon? There's definitely some intrigue there, and I think that it's purposefully left. I mean, not even vague. I think that it's pretty explicit. Yeah, Travant was a piece of shit. That's not even what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that there's enough room for interpretation on the front of, did he care about Altena, like as a person, not just as a tool of war? And there's like overwhelmingly the evidence says no, but there's enough of a question there to like make you think, oh, maybe, who knows? I like it though. And Leaf just says, "Yeah, I'm gonna try to talk to Altena to see if I can make her join my side. Basically, try to convince her that she's doing the wrong thing and that she should come home to her family." And that's where the chapter begins. I did some arenaing, got some characters. I don't think I got anyone up to promotion level, although a few characters were ready for promotion by the end of this chapter. And actually, I think only one was ready by the end of this chapter, but I also got close enough with a lot of characters where at the beginning of next chapter, I will be able to get pretty much everyone that I'm using up to level 20 and promote them. So that's nice. One thing that I wanted to point out, and this is a very like deep cut. It's a fact that not a lot of people, even who maybe play this game a lot, would know. But and it's also not something that would ever be useful information for you, but I feel like talking about it because it's something that I enjoyed learning about this game when I found out about it. So I've messed around with some ROM hacking, very light stuff, just messing around with classes and things, and I made some GBA edits, which have all been fun. I never posted them anywhere, but they were all stuff that you could do yourself in like an hour in FE Builder anyway. So I did also mess around with FE4. They don't have a FE builder for FE4, so I had to use Nightmare, which is archaic and definitely outdated. Although I'd been messing around with Nightmare since before FE Builder came out, so I knew my way around it fairly well. But anyway, I made an edit of this game where some of the holy weapons that aren't normally accessible became accessible. I give holy blood to some characters that wouldn't normally have it, stuff like that. And what I found out by doing that is that, and this makes sense if you think about it logically, because there are you don't have breakable weapons. So when you buy a weapon, you have that weapon forever unless you sell it to a pawn shop or, something like that. So there are a finite number of weapons in the game. You don't just keep getting an infinite supply of even basic stuff like iron swords and slim swords, steel swords. That's all finite. And I was able to use this to my advantage by changing around like some of the data in Nightmare to make it so that, stuff like the Brave Axe became the Hellswath or something like that. So Lex could get his hands on it or something. There was I think I had Azel join with Valflame, which would normally be a fire tome, and then in Gen 2 it didn't get passed on to his kid, but then I found out that it was in a shop somewhere, which means that Azel's fire tome ends up in a shop somewhere. Stuff like that. So they reuse and recycle some of these generic weapons, and they get put in shops if they don't get inherited down to your kids. And that's cool. I think that's just a fun little factoid. The thing that brought it to mind for me is that I bought a slim sword with, I believe, Nana, and it had kills on it. It was just fresh from the armory and had kills on it. So I have to imagine that it was like Aira's slim sword or something like that. Or someone got a slim sword and I killed a few people with it, and now it has like 8 kills on it or something like that. So that was interesting. So your first goal, this chapter is actually really flexible with how you can approach it. There's even like a completely optional corner of the map that you never have to go to. That's actually been true for the past couple of maps. There have been a few very out of the way villages that you don't have to get but can reward you for your time if you do. Your first goal is to capture the, I guess, the 2 castles that you have. If you look at it, kind of like goes around. It's like a boomerang. It goes around down to the southwest through 2 castles and then down to the southeast and then back up north a little bit for the final castle. I don't believe you can progress until you've captured both of them. I don't know that for a fact because I've never captured the first castle first. Because in order to recruit Hannibal, you can recruit Hannibal onto your team, you need to capture the second castle, which will recruit Charlo for you, and then Charlo can talk to Hannibal and he will be recruited onto your team. And then you can capture, actually, you don't even have to capture the second one. You just, the second castle turns blue. So that's nice. Hannibal is a bit of a pain in the ass to get around, especially since the beginning of the map actually has Altena flying a squadron of Wyvern Knights up there to fight you at the same time as Hannibal is coming to get you. So you have to take on 2 groups of enemies at once, and they're sort of moving in a sort of pincer maneuver at you, which is not always easy to play around. The Wyverns aren't particularly threatening if you can take them out on player phase, which isn't very hard. But if one of them survives, then they can go for like Layla or Lana, I guess, although I'll talk about that later. But pretty easy to take them on. And Hannibal's group isn't very difficult either. Again, they're sort of tricky on enemy phase since they have brave weapons, but on player phase they're not too hard to take down. But dealing with both of them at the same time is potentially really threatening. And if you go all out and attack them, Hannibal could die. Or what can happen instead is that if Hannibal loses enough of his troops, he'll go back to his castle to get more. This is what we want to happen because we can block him from getting into his castle and basically just trap him so that we can very easily get Charlo up there to talk to him. But we don't want to do it too early because we need someone in position to block him. And there's no one. I guess it's actually, maybe I should try that out next time I play this map. Just go for an all-out offensive on Hannibal's group and just be careful not to kill Hannibal. That might be easier. I'm not quite sure, but you need to leave someone behind to guard the home castle from Altena's Pegasus Knights, or Draco Knights, I should say. I just had Seliph promoted at this point, so I just had him book it all the way down to the second castle where we got Charlo. I'll talk about Charlo in a minute. I'll talk about him and Hannibal at the same time probably. But let's resolve what's going on with Altena first, because Altena comes up and you can take out most of her group. But if you have Finn, or sorry, not Finn, Leaf talk to Altena, then they will have they'll have a brief exchange. Leaf will explain the truth about what's been going on, and she, it's cheesy, but she looks into his eyes and she knows the truth all of a sudden, which is fine. That's fair enough. Once she finds out, Altena immediately leaves the battlefield and goes back to the main castle where Travant is. And Travant gets mad again, says, "Why did you leave? This is the last time I told you last time that I wouldn't accept this again." But she confronts him. She says, "Hey, you killed my parents, didn't you? And took me." And he says he doesn't try to deny it. He says, "Yeah, that's exactly what happened." And she tries to kill him actually, and Arion comes in and knocks her out. It's hard to tell from the dialogue if Travant thinks she's dead. It seems like he might, which is interesting. There's a whole lot of implications there because he is very casual about it. He says like, "Oh, you didn't just kill her, did you? You didn't have to go that far." And then that's really all he says about it, which is strange to be sure. If no matter how you look at it, really, because if he did care about her and thinks of her kind of as his own daughter, then he would be kind of sad that she's dead. But even if he doesn't, even if he just wanted her for Gaybold, then wouldn't he also be upset that his weapon is, one of his most powerful tools is gone? So I don't really get this sort of casual reaction, but that's maybe that's something I'll give some consideration to later. Travant talks to Arion and says, "I want you to have Gungnir," and Arion is understandably like, "Wait, why are you giving me Gungnir? If you go into battle without Gungnir, then you're going to die." And Travant says, "Yep, that's the plan. Do whatever you want with Thracia." And yeah, that's he basically admits that he's going into a suicide mission and that he wants Arion to sort of lead Thracia in whatever way he sees fit. He kind of does it in his own aloof, kind of callous way, making it seem like he doesn't really care. But I think that this is the last sort of desperate struggle of a man who tried to leave behind a legacy of absolute destruction and absolute ruthlessness, but in the service of making his country a better place for the people who live there. And he has basically failed. He didn't conquer Leinster. He did, but then they lost it immediately. And now, because of his own miscalculations, Thracia is being conquered by an invading army. And I think that he really just has decided that his time is at an end, and it's Arion's time to carry the torch and lead Thracia in whatever way is best. And I think that that's really compelling. It's kind of presented in a weird way, and I would be understanding if someone thought that Travant was just being really weirdly dumb, I guess, for lack of a better word, because he definitely acts like he's just going into battle on like the suicide mission for no reason. But I think it's kind of you have to read between the lines a little bit and realize that he kind of wants to die, or at the very least he wants to no longer have Thracia under his responsibility because he has proven himself to be not a great leader. If you want to talk about someone being dumb in the Thracian royal family, we'll talk about Arion later. I should also mention I said Gungnir, but to be clear, that is the holy weapon of house, whatever house they are. But the Thracian royal family, basically, it's been passed down through that lineage. Travant starts to move up in the same kind of general direction as Altena came up earlier, and you can fight him and kill him. And I tried to do it with Leaf. I did fight him with Leaf, and I had him shoot a bow at him, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get him." But no, it unfortunately he has Nile. He has a few skills. Travant's not a very threatening character. He's kind of anticlimactic, to be completely honest. I mean, maybe he's tough. I got the jump on him on player phase, so if I let him attack me, maybe he would have like wrecked my shit. But he wasn't particularly hard because I got the jump on him. So I tried to kill him with Leaf. I think I ended up killing him with Arthur with Forsetti after Leaf chipped him down. Sad that he couldn't get the kill for his parents, but he did have a really cool boss conversation, which was great. And that's the end of Travant in the story. We're gonna see him again in Thracia briefly, I think, which is actually kind of odd if you think about it. The entire game is called Thracia 776, which is the name of the year or the number of the year, and it's Thracia. You would expect Travant to be playing a big role in that, but I don't think he actually shows up all that much, from what I remember. I could be wrong. Instead, it's pretty much all new villains like Veld, Raedric, a couple others. But wonderful villain, my favorite in the game as of right now. My favorite in the series. Maybe this retrospective will get me to think more about certain characters. I'll put it this way: it didn't get me to like Travant any less. So unless it makes me like another villain more, then Travant will remain my favorite villain in the series, which is kind of weird that we're kind of leading with that. First game in the series has my favorite villain. It only goes downhill from here, but there are some really good villains left in the series, so it's not a lost cause quite yet. At this point, I had Charlo talk to Hannibal. Again, we're going to talk about both of them in just a second, but before I do that, I'll talk about what happens in the story. We cut back to Arion, and it turns out that Altena actually survived, and they're talking about how Travant is dead and how he left Thracia in Arion's hands. And Arion still says that he's going to continue to fight. And in this chapter, it's not properly explained. I know that Arion comes back next chapter and is talked about next chapter, but in chapter 9, it's not made extremely clear why Arion is doing this. It's Seliph speculates that it's pride. That's all we get, is that Seliph says that it's his pride causing him to extend this conflict, which doesn't make any fucking sense to me, but I don't know, maybe I'm just missing something, but it seems like, Travant kind of put this last request on Arion. Do whatever you want with Thracia. Not necessarily bring it peace, not necessarily end the fighting, but he didn't say, I want you to continue this war in my name. I want you to avenge me. I want you to lead our people into a victorious battle path. He doesn't say that. He says, do whatever you feel is best for Thracia. And I guess we have to assume that Arion is just being prideful and that he is trying to lead it down the path that his father did, even though it's kind of implied. I don't think he ever outright says it, but it's kind of implied that he felt that that wasn't the right path anyway. Like he wasn't saying that it was bad, at least not in front of Travant, because he was very like, we need to listen to him. He's our king. He's my father. I gotta do what he tells me no matter what, and I can't put up any sort of resistance, unlike Altena. But in conversations with Altena, he seemed sympathetic. He seemed like he, I don't know. I mean, maybe I might have to go back and reread some of the dialogue, because maybe I'm just completely misinterpreting his character. He always struck me as, and maybe this is just because I remember him coming back as a good guy later, but he always struck me as being a good guy. He struck me as the type that would end the conflict if given the chance, and the fact that he doesn't hear and we're not given an explanation as to why is kind of confusing to me. I might go back and reread some of this, because I don't quite remember if I'm missing something, or if it's just this confusing. Okay. I'm gonna backpedal here a little bit, because he does say something that I still have a big question mark on, but it's not. He does explain it, and what he says is it's in his conversation with Travant right before Travant leaves to go take on take to the battlefield. And Travant is kind of implying, without really saying it, he says that we don't need to be hated by their kind, which I'm assuming is referring to the liberators. So he's s- implying that maybe Arion should, now that he has been like cutting off the head of the snake, or the snake cutting off its own head, I guess, because people hate him. He has a vicious reputation and he's extremely ruthless, and everyone thinks that he's a bad dude. So I think that Travant is saying, with me out of the way, there will be nothing stopping you from establishing a peace with the Liberation Army, because they're going to trust you at least more than they trust me, which is not at all. So I'm reading into it a little bit. I think that's what he's trying to say. And Arion responds, "Are you seriously suggesting that I should seek a truce, Father? No, never. To comply with the rebels now would be unthinkable." Which I think maybe was suffering from a little bit of sunk cost fallacy. Like, he's come so far, it wouldn't be fit for him to go back on that now that he's so committed to it. It just wouldn't feel right. I think maybe that's more, maybe Travant is thinking that, but I think maybe that's more Arion saying that. We've fought for this long, why would we give it up now? We've come too far to just seek a truce. Again, seems a bit questionable, but I don't know. Arion isn't a particularly fleshed out character, so maybe I'm just making incorrect assumptions about his moral fiber. It's a bit weird to me. That's all I'm trying to say. I find it funny in this cutscene between Altena and Arion after Travant has died. Even Arion's like, "Yeah, I don't get this guy." He says his heart was an enigma at the best of times, which is true. I'll give him that. I think that I kind of understand what he was going for. I could be wrong, but his actions didn't seem terribly confusing to me. Maybe a little bit. I might just be biased too because I like him so much. So maybe his actions are really confusing and I'm just not seeing it. What he says though in this cutscene kind of goes back on what he said to Travant. He tells Altena to get out of there, to go join Leaf and Seliph and everyone. And she says, "Well, what are you gonna do?" And he says, "I gotta stay here and fight." And she says, "No, just call a truce." And he says, and I quote, "I wish I could, and I would were it not for Father's final words to me." But his final words to him were, "Do whatever you want. We don't need to be hated by them." Well, Travant literally, I mean, well, he wasn't super explicit about it, but to me, the clear implication, and the implication that Arion also seemed to get out of it, was that Travant was saying, "Make a truce. I'm hated by them. You are not. You have a chance to establish a relationship here." And then he left. So what the fuck is he talking about? I don't know. I really don't. As I said, Thracia is yours. Do as you see fit. All I ask is for you to find a way to liberate Thracia's people from their suffering. Farewell, Arion. So that one's a little bit more up to interpretation. That is literally the last block of text that he says to Arion before he leaves. So I guess Arion thinks that he's just basically being Travant though at that point, and I thought that the point was that he wasn't supposed to. I don't know. Again, I feel like maybe I'm getting hung up on my own preconceptions about Arion's character that aren't actually there, and I thought they were, but maybe they're not. His actions are just a little confusing to me. It's not Ares level of bad. It's not even anywhere close. He's not like he Arion is a fairly consistent character who acts maybe a little bit questionably, but he's not a mess. He's not contradicting himself constantly. I think that it's just a little bit hard to get the grips on where his head is at. I wish that he had talked a little bit more about why he's doing this. I'm spending a lot of time on this. I don't think it's I think it's kind of a big deal. Like I said, I don't think it's as bad as Ares, but I also think that Ares is so inconsequential to the plot. He's not an important character, so it's you can just kind of ignore his whole story and everything else still makes sense. This is this is the driving conflict for the latter half of this map, so I think it's a little bit more important to analyze it, but up to your interpretation, I think. I think that Arion My generous read of this is that Arion believes that Travant said to him, liberate Thracia from suffering, and he thinks that the best way to do that is to follow in Travant's footsteps and fight this clearly losing battle. I don't I don't quite get it, but maybe it makes sense. Maybe I'm just not understanding it properly. So now we have conquered the top half of the map, essentially. There's still Grutia, I believe, which is in the southern part, and then the main Thracia capital castle. So before we move on, let's talk quickly about Corpool and Hannibal, or Charlo and Hannibal. Hannibal is a static character. He's the last completely static character, I think. I believe Altena's inventory is variable. Hannibal is a completely static character. Nothing about his stats, his growth, his inventory will ever change. He is basically like if they took Arden and they gave him to you at the end, but they did all the training for you. Like it's like if Arden went and trained off screen and then came back in what chapter would this be? 4? No, 3. Chapter 3. And was all beefed up. Which is to say he's not very good. I should make like a jingle out of it at this point. Like, I'm not going to sing because you guys don't want to hear that. But footlocked units are bad in Fire Emblem 4. What do you know? Couldn't have guessed that. Couldn't have seen that one coming. Who knew I was going to say it? But Hannibal has it even worse off because he is even more footlocked. He's like extra footlocked. Footlocked plus, or I guess footlocked minus. He has less movement even than characters like Larcey and Ulster. Even unpromoted Larcey and Ulster, he has less move than. So promoted Larcey and Ulster who get +1 move on promotion, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that actually. He's just completely outclassed. Now, his stats aren't that bad. He's not fast. He can't even, I mean, he doesn't have pursuit. He would actually probably be able to double some things because he can use swords. He has good weapon ranks. He can use axes and bows, I believe, at B rank, and then lances and swords at A rank. And he's got good strength. He's got good HP. Got good defense. Terrible everything else. Actually, his skill isn't half bad either. His growths are not the worst. He has a good HP growth, a good strength growth. I don't usually go this in depth, but I have the wiki page up anyway, so I might as well. He has good HP, strength, and defense growths, and then terrible everything else. Great Shield, you actually get to use Great Shield. You would have been able to if you had promoted Arden too, but most people aren't going to do that. So the fact that you actually get someone with Great Shield to play around with is really fun. He's good at guarding castles. You can warp him around. There are plenty of opportunities to use that fact in this map. And also, I don't remember about Chapter 10, but in Endgame, there are plenty of times where your castles are attacked at various points, and you can have him plop down on one of them and just grab a javelin. He doesn't have one in his base inventory, but you can just grab one from the armory or something, and it'll take him a while, but it's not like you're in a hurry, so you can just let him fight him off, and he'll get her done. He's bad, but he's better at that. He has that niche, I guess, is a good way of putting it, and he's better at it than some other characters would be. Especially when you think about the opportunity cost. What other characters would you want to defend your castle with that wouldn't be better off in the main action? Maybe Julia, but spoilers, we're not going to have Julia for that much longer, so that's not going to be much of a factor. Who else? Like maybe Sed. Sed's pretty good at it, or any footlocked magic unit, basically. I feel like if you're gonna use Larcey and Ulster or Shannon, then they'd be wasted on that, right? Or if you don't want to use them, then they're probably going to be underleveled, so you should just use Hannibal anyway. I don't know. And then also Hannibal can retaliate at range, unlike Shannon. So he's got that niche, and that's something, right? I want to I'll give him that. I won't take that away from him. I'm not going to say he's a good unit, but there's no reason to not use him, I guess, in this game where everyone can be deployed. Charlo is a footlocked healer. I've talked about how that's generally not that bad because range staffs exist. They're not as you don't need to have them on the front lines to get experience. and they can just be good supports from the back lines. He joins with the physics staff. He can get a berserk staff from an event in this chapter. Only him, not Corporal, Charlo only. And he has Paragon, and you can just buy him like a men's staff or something, or a heal staff, whatever you want to do. Recover, possibly. Recover's only B rank in this game. Pretty much, I think every staff except for Rescue and Valkyria are B rank. So he can use, he only has B rank staffs, but he can use pretty much every staff in the game. The only one that he wouldn't be able to use is Rescue, and it's not like he'd be great at using that anyway. I'm not saying he's a good unit. He's terrible. Again, footlocked, really late joining time, not any good weapons or stabs, I guess, in his inventory, but you can never have too many. Like, what's the worst that he's gonna do, right? He's gonna sit in the back, and you might need an extra healer every once in a while, and you can just have him heal someone. It's not that big of a deal. He can hit someone from a distance with physic. It might get you out of a pinch. It's something. It's better, arguably, than maybe some mediocre combat units, right? Like maybe better than some of the. I would say maybe this is a hot take. I would say that both Corporal and Charlo are better than Asalo. Honestly, maybe even Febale, because just being a footlocked archer is so goddamn terrible. I think I'd rather use whatever tiny amount of support utility I can get out of him than have Febale or Asalo trudge their way over to the enemy and start killing them like one per turn. I don't know. Probably gonna get some people who disagree with me on that. I'm not quite sure. People talk about his recruitment a lot. I actually didn't mind it. I think that if you have an unpromoted Seliph, which I did the first time I played this game, so that was a nightmare. But I think if you know the trick about getting him to run back to his castle for reinforcements and then just blocking him, I think that it's perfectly manageable. It's not hard at all, to be completely honest. I would say, and I did say this in that episode, and after thinking about it for a little while, I was like, I wonder if Hannibal is gonna change this. I had said that Jamp has the hardest recruitment in this game, and I still believe, now that I've recruited every character, because Altena is the last character that you get, I do still believe that Jamp is the hardest recruitment in this game because he will just kill you. There's like a very high chance that he will proc either a crit or adept or a cost or just kill you straight up because he's pretty strong. And he's not a good unit, but when he's an enemy, he's annoying to deal with. So I think that, and the terrain obviously is a big deal. You can't just walk up to him. Yeah, and you can only recruit him with Adine, a whole bunch of stuff. So congratulations, Champ. You're the hardest unit to recruit in Genealogy of the Holy War. Hannibal is a kind of a cool character. I think that this concept of him just being so loyal to his country, being a he reminds me of Dussel a lot. He's loyal to the country to the point of thinking that if it comes down to it and the lord he is obligated to serve is doing a disservice to that country, then he will turn his back on it and fight alongside the people who we think are going to give the country better long-term prospects. He's fine. He's not anything to write home about, but I think he's all right. Corporal slash Charlo, same deal. Not a whole lot to go on about here. I believe Corporal has a conversation with Sylvia that's kind of interesting, but the Layla Charlo equivalent is just boring. She just says something about, "Oh, you've never seen a dancer before, have you?" And he says, "No." Char Charlotte? That's his name now? What the fuck? It's like Char Charlot. Charlotte. Or Charlotte? I don't know. I would like to briefly talk about Corporal as a unit because normally the when you're describing how a regular unit compares to their substitute, it's pretty straightforward. It's just the regular unit plays exactly the same as their substitute, except the substitute is way, way worse. They have worse stats, worse growth rates, worse holy blood, worse skills, everything. Corporal to Charlot is actually a little bit interesting. I mean, there's the whole thing about the Berserk staff that's kind of cool, but I think more interestingly than that is that Corporal is a pretty good staff bot compared to what you're going to be using at that point, assuming you didn't train Leaf. I know that he's a good unit. I'm not saying he's a bad unit. There is a non-zero amount of people who are going to play genealogy. Not everyone plays genealogy more than once. So you got to think about you're playing genealogy, it's your first time through, you probably don't know a ton about it. You see Leaf and you think, "Wow, this guy sucks. I'm going to bench him." And they do it. And so realistically, and most people aren't going to pair Adine and Claude because that's not a very pushed pairing, nor is it one that is easy to get. Most people are going to get Midir or Azel or something like that. Jamk, maybe. This guy is going to be your only A rank staff unit, and that's not insignificant. It's worth considering, and it's also worth considering that he's the only character in the game aside from Sed who can inherit Valkyria, which is cool. Being able to move on from losing a unit without having to reset and just knowing, okay, I'll be able to get them back later. That's some nice insurance. It's a nice safety net. One of the funniest things to do is to actually, and this isn't unreasonable by any stretch of the imagination. It's not like no one's ever going to do this. Sylvia and Lewin is one of the pairings that the game kind of pushes a little bit too. They have a lot of love point conversations. It's very easy to make them fall in love by accident. And if you do this, Corporal will have Forsetti, and he cannot use it at base. But if you promote him, he will be able to, which is one of the most fun training arcs in that any character could ever go through. You start off with this level 1 priest. He's terrible at everything. He doesn't even have any good stabs because Lewin won't pass him any. So he has physic and that's it. And you gruelingly train him up. You heal everybody, every little last tink of HP. You heal up so that he can get all the experience possible. You can milk all that experience for him. And then after 20 levels of doing that, he pops off and you can use Forsetti on a unit that isn't mobile, but it's just a fun. It's a fun little he basically becomes the ultimate est is what I'm trying to say here. And that's fun. Sometimes that's enjoyable. I'd recommend giving that a whirl if you haven't done it before. It's an enjoyable time. And other than that, he plays extremely linearly. He will always have a rank stabs because Sylvia will always be his mom, and Sylvia has minor Bragi blood, so he will always have a rank in stabs. But getting him Forsetti or getting him Valkyria can make him I wouldn't say a good unit, but I would say definitely gives him some interesting utility and makes him a fun gameplay unit, in my opinion. One of the more fun gameplay units in Gen 2, for sure. Speaking of promoting a priest, I actually promoted Lana this chapter, which you don't think about it because it sneaks up on you. They're not fighting, but healers in this game get a good amount of experience, especially if they're like Lana, because Nana also has stabs, but she's really only using mend. I think maybe she has the return staff or something. I don't know. But Lana has warp, physic, fortify, rescue, all these return. I think actually Lana has return. So she's getting a lot of experience. Fortify gives her almost a full level, if not a full level. Physic gives her quite a bit. Warp gives her quite a bit. So it's not unreasonable to get her to a pretty high level. And then because I made Claude her dad, she has like crazy high stats. So she's clearing out the arena. She is soloing entire groups of enemies when she gets to them because she is footlocked. I'm not saying she's a good combat unit or anything. I'm just saying it's fun to have a character who you're not really particularly trying to train up, and then suddenly you're like, oh, huh, they're level 20. I guess I'll promote them, and then they're just a combat god, barring the fact that they can't get to the enemies. But you know what I mean. At this point, some Granville reinforcements come from the top left. There's also some villages up there. None of them say anything like super notable. One of them gives you a barrier ring, which I don't think is particularly significant. It's good money, I guess. I gave it to Patty, or sorry, Daisy, so she can sell it, I suppose. Some Granville mercenaries or some Granville reinforcements come from the top left of the map. Your next goal is the bottom right of the map, or the bottom center, I suppose. and I split my army up. You don't have to. It's easier if you don't. But I had Seliph, Leaf, Oifi, and Finn and Altena run. Well, I recruited Altena. I'll talk about Altena in a minute. Run down, and I had the Granville reinforcements handled by everyone else. And that was fun because the Granville reinforcements are pretty tough. They're a big group, and they all use different weapon types. So it's not like one guy is just going to solo all of them. There are a lot of Axe Knight units that can just be soloed by Ulster or Larce or Ares or someone like that. But there's axes, there's lances, there's swords, and then the boss has a really powerful magic tome. So no one could withstand a full onslaught of these guys. So I had to really play defensively. I had to wait for them to come to me and just try to destroy them all on player phase, which was tricky. Meanwhile, Seliph and all of them are just destroying everything down south, and it was when you have two objectives, it can sometimes be fun to split your army up. And yes, it is possible to optimize the fun out of a map. That's always going to be possible in Fire Emblem. But when they give you the option and make it reasonable for you to do so, I think that that's also something to be aware of and to feel positively about. Seliph recruits Altena by talking to her, not Leaf, oddly enough, only Altena, or only Seliph, I should say. And they have a brief conversation. Altena says, "Yeah, Leaf told me everything." Seliph's like, "Welcome to the team." They briefly reflect on the type of person Travant was, and Seliph says, "Man, I can't believe that that guy only ever used you as a tool. He only ever brought you into his family, made you his daughter because he wanted to use you as a weapon." And she says, "Yeah, that definitely seems like the case, but it did feel like a lot of the time that he cared for me as his own daughter." So that again kind of puts some hints that maybe Travant isn't as bad of a guy as he initially seems. I don't know. Even from beyond the grave, Travant is a great villain. That's all I'm trying to say. Then Altana joins your group, and she is fine. She's a flyer. She does good damage. She isn't spectacular. Just like with Aaron and with Fee, she can't utilize the movement bonus of being on roads, but she can sort of make up for that by being able to fly around mountains and forests and generally be more versatile in where she can go compared to your other units. So I think it works out. Not the best unit in the game. I mean, if we're factoring in availability, she's one of the worst, that's for sure. But just as a matter of should you put effort into using her now that she has joined you, I think you don't have to. Like, you won't really be missing out on all that much if you don't, but you could do a lot worse, that's for sure. You could train Hannibal, or you could train Charlo or Purple, and you'd be doing a lot worse. That's for sure. This, incidentally, is where Charlo can get his Berserk staff. It is also worth noting, I'm going to go ahead and make a few asides because there's some stuff throughout this chapter that I kind of missed and would like to touch on briefly. If you kill Hannibal before conquering the castle where you would normally get Corporal or Charlo, they are not recruited. You won't be able to get them, which I think was odd. I didn't actually know that, but today I learned. So, for some fun little conversations, I'll go over all of the conversations and events that I think are worth talking about here. There's a village that, if you visit it with Hermina, or Jian, these are substitute characters, I believe, for Fee and Nana, respectively. Let me just double check. Yeah, Fee and Nana, respectively. They will be, maybe accosted is the wrong word, but a guy will come up and start flirting with them, and it is a person posing as Shannon, which is significant because in the next game there's a character named Shanam with an M that poses as Shannon, and for the exact same reason because he wants to get popular with the ladies, and it's working. Shanam is genuinely one of the funniest characters in Thracia, maybe the whole series, and I love him, and I can't wait to get to him. And I think that I don't know if it was intended. Where would Shannon be in this? This would be after the events of Thracia, so he would have ended up in. I mean, he'd be in the right time and place, right? So that's not completely unreasonable. That would be Shannon. That's just funny to me. And then, of course, Shanam himself is based on what's his name? Samuel, I think is his name now. A guy who poses as Nevere in FE3 Book 2 and FE12. Fun little Easter egg. They get some kind of shield. I think it gives them a defense boost. If Hawk, who is said substitute, enters one of the castles, I believe it is the one where you recruit Charlo, then he gets a book that gives him +3 magic and +3 resistance, and then the village with Shanam gives either Femina or Jan +3 defense. Patty and Fevale have a conversation here where they reflect on just their life together. You know, they grew up as orphans. They didn't think that they had a mother at all, let alone that she was someone who was a noble woman. And it's just a cute little interaction. Asalo and Daisy have a significantly different one because their mom isn't a noble, and they just talk about kind of the same thing. Asalo apparently has been hoarding money from arena winnings, so that's kind of funny. Yes, so the lean and corporal conversation is significantly more interesting than the Layla and Charlotte one. First of all, corporal is a lot more, I guess, assertive is the wrong word, a lot more opinionated because Lean asks if he's not a big fan of dancers, and he says, no, no, I don't like dancers, which is interesting, whereas Charlotte just kind of says, this is the first time I've ever seen one. And there's a bit of a hint there that they're related. I don't know if they ever actually figure it out, but they talk about how they were both raised in Darna. And of course, there's some irony there of Corporal saying that he doesn't care for dancers and his mom was a dancer. So interesting to say the least. Julia and Seliph have a conversation which gives him +3 resistance, and it gives some foreshadowing about how she's about to disappear. She says that she feels, what does she say? Dread. She feels dread. I feel as if I'll be torn from you and we'll never see each other again, which of course is going to happen soon. And they talk about actually where they're going to go next. And he says that they're going to go to Militos, which is the free city of Militos, whatever that means. And which is it gives some nice world building. I mentioned at the beginning of this series that Militos is a country known for its merchants, and he brings that up here. He promises to take her shopping, which is really cute. It's adorable. I actually really like this as a conversation. This also characterizes Julia really well because, well, first of all, she seems excited to go shopping, which I love when characters just have hobbies and things they enjoy doing. It characterizes them and gives them textures in ways you wouldn't necessarily think about. Finding out a character has a hobby or an interest is something that always gives me a little bit of joy whenever I talk about a character or look into a character, I should say. And then it's not earth shattering, but it does characterize Julia a little bit more outside of that because she says when the excuse for Seliph getting +3 resistance is that she casts a ward spell on him. And Seliph says, hey, that's gonna take a lot out of you, and she says, all I've done is take so far, and I wanna give something back to you for all you've done for me. And it's cute, it's nice. I like this conversation a lot. Probably my favorite one in the chapter, to be honest. Okay, I just read the Finn and Altena conversation, and I might have already be changing my mind because this conversation's so cute. He says to her that I apologize for not looking for you in all this time. I didn't think that you were alive, and not only were you alive, you were really close. I mean, they've been in Thracia a lot, especially, taking this in the context of next game. They've been in and out of Thracia all over the place. I think Altena shows up a couple times in the next game, Leaf's right there, and they don't know. They have no idea. So Finn's just feeling really emotional. He starts crying actually because he feels like a failure because he didn't go to look for her. And then they just have a cute bonding moment where I mean Altena was young when she was kidnapped, but she wasn't an infant. She was probably I think 3. So she has some memories vaguely from when she was that age, and she remembers that she used to be really fond of Finn and always seek his attention, and that's just really cute. When I'm just imagining 3-year-old Altena playing with Finn, and then that's just great. And then this conversation between Hannibal and Altena actually gives some context as to what Arion's doing. He says Hannibal speculates that Arion just wants to die a warrior's death rather than giving into a truce and seeing that as like a shame, a dishonor. So that makes sense. He really is just kind of doing the same thing that Travant did. He has some warrior's pride, and he wants to die an honor what he sees as an honorable death. So that makes sense. I think maybe I was being a little bit too. I was going on too much about the Arion thing. I think it wasn't as confusing as I was making it out to be, and this explanation actually answers a lot of the questions that I had originally. Okay, and that's all the events and conversations. So let's just get into the last stretch of the map. You capture the bottom castle. It's not hard. Some of those conversations only happen after you capture the bottom castle, but that's not a difficult thing to do at all. And then the next stage of the map starts, and this is actually maybe my favorite section of any map in this game so far. Possibly other than the first stretch of chapter 3, but I think this one might actually be better. So Arion says that they're taking to the battlefield, and he sends out 4 groups of wyverns. He sends one to your home castle, one to the castle where Hannibal came from, one to the castle where you recruited Charlo, and then he leads one towards the castle where Seliph just conquered, the bottom castle of Grutia. And this is really cool because, first of all, you're almost never asked to protect your castle late into the map. Any time that there's actually been a threat of enemies getting to your main castle, it's at the very beginning, and you can just clear out those enemies, and you won't have to worry about it anymore unless you fuck up real bad and someone slips by or something like that. So the fact that they're asking you to double back and you almost definitely didn't leave anyone there. I guess there's possibly some really underleveled units that you just haven't been using. I usually just use everyone even if they don't contribute very much because I don't mind taking the time to move everyone around. But there's probably going to be a couple units that you aren't using and you can probably have them guard the castle, but they're probably not going to be very strong. And if you didn't leave anyone behind, you're going to have to warp people back, return people, and it's a kind of a mad dash to like defend these castles that you didn't have to think about a minute ago, and you probably didn't think you were going to have to think about again. Unfortunately, the Wyvern squadrons, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, they're not particularly difficult. Pretty much all of my characters were able to solo most of them. Each squadron has like a commander with a brave lance that's kind of threatening, but once he's gone, except for the really weak characters like Daisy and Layla, there aren't any threatening prospects here. Most of them are just going to go down very quickly. Maybe some of your frail sword units, like Larse, won't survive, but probably you'll be fine. They all have javelins, which make them difficult to counterattack, but again, not a huge concern. The bottom squadron, on the other hand, is a completely different story. I don't know this for a fact, but just based on what I remember off the map, I would speculate that the group that Arion is with is just stronger in general. I remember them being kind of difficult to take down, but I could be incorrect about that. But what is an absolute nightmare is Arion himself. He is using Gungnir, and that gives him massive stat buffs, and he is a monster. I mean, the stat buffs aren't even like that high for a holy weapon, but his stats are just really good in general. And he has adept, which he has, I believe, off the top of my head. I want to say he has about a 35% chance to proc it or a 30% chance. So it's not he's not an easy fight. That's for sure. Like I said, I had Seliph, Leaf, Altena, Oifi, and Finn. 5 of my best characters going up against him. Oifi at this point is kind of maybe still in the top half of characters, but kind of low on that in that top half. But everyone else there, like I probably just listed off half of my top 10 characters in the game so far. And they stood no chance. Seliph with his silver sword, his 100 kill silver sword, which has been a great way of dealing with every single enemy up to this point because it has 50 crit on it and he has like an 80% chance to crit with it every time. 40% chance to hit. Leaf with a bow, 60% chance to hit. Altena with Gabolg, 26% chance to hit without Selip's leadership stars. With Selip's leadership stars, I believe it was like 40 something. So still really bad. I ended up having to reset this and arena rig. Well, first of all, I tried to do a few things. I tried to just like run around him, which you can do. I wasn't sure how the terrain would work out if I would actually be able to get to it, but it is technically possible if you get a little lucky to just run around him and capture the final castle without beating Arion. That's kind of anticlimactic, but it might be your best option. I don't know. But what I ended up having to do is I chipped him down. First of all, I had to rig arena numbers until I got lucky enough with Leaf hitting him with the light brand. That was the most accurate option I had for dealing with him at that point because it had 80% chance to hit as opposed to like 40s and 50s that I was dealing with everywhere else. So I had to get lucky. He doubled because thankfully of all the things, Arion is not particularly fast. He still has a good enough chance to proc adept, but he only has like 15 attack speed, so it could be a lot worse, that's for sure. And he ended up hitting 3 times because of an adept proc, so just about the best I could hope for. He could technically proc it twice and attack 4 times. He could also only attack twice, and he was also not guaranteed to hit every attack. So I think that 3 hits is pretty much the mean for luck on that, probably a little bit higher. And then I just had to get lucky and connect with Altena, and then that was good enough. Kind of now that I'm thinking about it, kind of fitting that Altena and Leaf teamed up to get that kill. I think I also chipped him with Seliph at some point, or Oifi maybe, I don't know. But he was so strong. And then his Wyvern squadron after that wasn't they weren't great, but they were threatening, that's for sure. But once he's out of the picture, you can get past him and capture the castle, and that's the end of the map. The end is actually. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention something. After Arion goes down, he doesn't die. He gets rescued by Julius, the same way that Ishtar was in the last chapter. So you get around him and you capture the castle, and that's the end of the map. The story here at the end is very brief, and I think they pick up on it at the beginning of next chapter, although I'm not sure. Seliph basically just says, "Hey, is it true that Arion disappeared in the middle of that fight?" And Lewin's like, "Yeah, he did. We're pretty sure that he was taken away by Prince Julius." And they spend some time talking about Julius and how strong he is and all that. And Seliph's like, "Wow, yeah, he must be really tough." And Lewin says, "Yeah, but the thing that's giving him this power is the dark god Loptir." And that's where it ends. I actually thought I accidentally hit start or B or something. I thought I skipped the cutscene, but no, he just ends it by dropping that bomb. And that's the end of the chapter. So I've had some time to think on this. I played the chapter a few days ago, and I was surprised at how positively I ended up coming away from it. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed this map, and I'm wondering if maybe I didn't enjoy it when I played it last time. I played it a couple times at this point. This is, I think, maybe my third or fourth time playing through FE4. I've actually only beaten it once, but I've gotten to endgame, I believe, at least one other time for sure, and then maybe a third time as well. So this is probably my fourth time playing this map, and I always kind of just forget about it. I always kind of write it off. But doing this deep dive, I actually think that there's a lot here to love. I think the beginning is really strong. I think that being pincered by both Hannibal's troops and Altena and then later Travant is a very fun challenge because you're not being forced to fight on multiple fronts per se, but you are being kind of choked into this formation where you have these really threatening knights on the one hand, because a lot of them are very threatening. They're not very mobile, but they if they get to you, they can hurt you quite a bit because they have brave weapons and stuff. And then you have to be careful not to kill too many of them before you're ready to block Hannibal from getting more of them. Not to mention, you don't want to kill Hannibal himself. And then on the other hand, you have these strong, not super strong, but very mobile and able to slip past your defenses Wyvern Knights who are close to your main castle. One of them actually ended up capturing my main castle at some point. So that's a genuinely pretty fun and challenging bit of gameplay there. Usually this starts to fall apart around the middle of the map, but I think that I guess the middle of the map isn't super well defined here, right? I guess the middle of the map is slightly boring because, well, the Hannibal recruitment is kind of what I would call the end of the beginning. It's where the beginning of the map ends and the middle of the map begins. The Hannibal recruitment is also pretty interesting. I think that if Seliph wasn't promoted, it would be kind of a nightmare. But I also think that it's challenging and rewarding, not in really a extrinsic way, because Charlo and Hannibal are not good units. So I mean it more in terms of it's fun to puzzle that out. Like, okay, how do I get Seliph all the way down here and get Charlo all the way back up? How do I hold them off for that long without killing Hannibal? I think if you know the trick to block Hannibal get out from getting reinforcements, that also helps a lot too, because it means that it's more of a manageable, I think, task than trying to hold off wave after wave after wave of reinforcement. Especially considering that if there are any reinforcements left by the time Charlo gets to Hannibal, he will just die because I'm pretty sure that his Hannibal's men will go for Corporal. I could be wrong about that though. There is a boring section in the middle where you have to walk all your units down to the castle where you recruited Corporal slash Charlo. But then after that, the Granville reinforcements show up and you have to deal with them at the same time as taking the castle to the south. I think that if the castle to the south sent up units at the same time as the Granville forces were attacking from the north, that would be great. That would make this map even better, in my opinion. But as it stands, it's still pretty good because you're going to want to speed things up. You're not going to want to take 10 million years, and you're going to want to send a few units to go take the castle to the south, especially since it looks so easy. You're like, I can handle it. I just send a couple of my good units, and I can take care of this. So I think that that's fun. And then the top group is pretty difficult to deal with as well. It's not just a solo stomp with one character. You actually have to be conscious of who you're exposing to what enemies. I really think that this is a fantastic map. And I think that's an unpopular opinion. I don't think that this map is generally considered great. And I also think in general the Gen 2 maps are considered worse than the Gen 1 maps, which I cannot wrap my brain around, to be completely honest. I'm not saying the Gen 2 maps are all super interesting, but I am saying that the Gen 1 maps are generally just awful. I think that the obviously Spirit Force in chapter 1, chapter 2 the whole thing is a mess. Chapter 3 is good, but then chapter 4 has the drawbridge bullshit and chapter 5 has that desert slog. And chapter 7 has a desert slog too, but it's kind of made up for. And I'm not going to go through every map, but on the whole, I think that it's a lot better in Gen 2 than it is in Gen 1. I like Gen 2 maps better. I don't know why that's an unpopular opinion, to be completely honest. I mean, I think they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which I don't care for much either, to be honest. But I think that at least they're fun pretty consistently, even if there is a lot more walking than maybe I would like. It's still better than having to do the fucking Spirit Forest, I'll tell you that much. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. I think that this map is maybe the first in the game that's just fun. Beginning to end, it's really good. There's one boring section to speak of, and then there's one section that you kind of have to find the fun a little bit. You have to be willing to split your army up. You don't have to do that, and the game's not asking you to. And if you don't do that, I can see this middle section with the troops coming from the northwest as being kind of boring. And I'll accept that, right? If you want to use that against it. But the beginning section is really fun, the end section is really fun, and the middle I think is fun if you're willing to be a little bit adventurous and maybe play a little bit suboptimally. So chapter 3 on the other hand I think is really fun, but I think definitely has a very noticeable lag in quality around the middle. I think that the middle section with Eldegon is not good. It's good for story, but it's not good for gameplay. It's just two big armies clashing in the middle of the battlefield. You're not like actually incentivized or even given the option really to split up your army because I mean maybe one of your guys in your army is visiting villages, but you can't capture the castle until you get past Eldagon. I mean, technically you can, but I don't think you're going to be able to because the movement on those units is so high. But on the other hand, Chapter 3 has a better beginning and end than this one, or at least a better end. I don't know about beginning. I think the beginnings are about equal. It's the closest that any map has come so far, but I still think I'm going to give it to Chapter 3 because the Hannibal recruitment is kind of obnoxious, especially if you don't know what you're doing and you have an unpromoted Seliph or something like that. I think that the Hannibal promotion is genuinely pretty annoying, and for that reason, I think that Chapter 3 is just edging it out a little bit. But I think that but more so than any map we've seen, it comes close to beating Chapter 3. I like this map a lot, and I think that it's one that isn't on most people's radars. So if you're ever playing Genealogy again, go back and get to this map and see how you like it. Maybe split up your army a little bit more and keep some of the stuff I've said today in mind. I think you'll really enjoy it. And last but not least, we have our news segment. I'll lead with what I'm doing right now, which is to say not much compared to last time. I am still just playing that Trails in the Sky game and having a blast with that. Otherwise, I haven't really been doing anything else. So, I mean, I think it hasn't even been a week since I uploaded the last episode. So, not a lot has changed, basically. And then the only thing that's really going on in news is that I mentioned a few weeks ago that there was a really cool looking Ike figure, and now I can say that added on to that is a really cool Marth figure. I believe they're made by the same company. I don't know where I'm getting that from, actually. Nothing on here says that. Okay, yeah, it is. At least I believe it is. I'm not quite sure. So yeah, quick wrap up this time around, but honestly, I don't want another 2 hour episode. I'm going on 150 right now, and it's probably going to be closer to 130 by the time I cut out all the fluff. But I don't want another super long episode like last or not last time, but I mean I will say chapter 7 we talked about a lot outside the map. We had that really long spiel about Ares, and we had that really long spiel about the villains of the game, which would have had to go somewhere anyway. So I'm not regretting how long that episode was. I'm just saying that I don't want to make that the norm. Absolutely not. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you guys have a nice rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.